Welcome back for another book review. Today we're talking about this one. So this is the Junior Witch's Handbook, a kid's guide to white magic, spells and rituals by Nikki Van de Kar, again with her name, this one. So kind of as the title would suggest, this is mostly aimed at kids, but specifically older kids. So kind of like I don't know, I would say like tweens is kind of maybe where she's aiming towards for the age range. Definitely not teenager by any means, but not littles either. The majority of this book is aimed at spells and rituals for them to do. There's a teeny bit at the beginning to kind of set you up a little bit-ish, like how to set up an altar, and cool. Just not a whole lot. I gave this a 3, and it's like, meh. It's not like the worst one ever written. But also, is this one I would get for my own kids in the future? No. So I liked her Reel of the Year one. This, not really. So it's fine. It's not the worst. The spells are probably helpful. It's got stuff for like usual kid things like family and friends and like preparing for tests and stuff. But also, again, consent still matters and is not really discussed, which is just something I will be implementing with my own children because that's a huge thing for me. Every aspect of your life, you should be using consent. That should be a given as much as possible. And as parents, like sometimes you do have to step in a little bit, like your kid does have to like get their vaccines, or, you know, they do actually have to go to the doctor. They don't get a whole lot of choice in that. But that's also you as the parent and being like, yeah, this really creepy person that's like acting very inappropriate towards you, you're not allowed near them. End of story, you know? Like there's times where consent, it matters more for like other people, but as parents, you have a little more control over that for a time until your kids are old enough to make that decision on their own. But like, this is not that age group. And so this book is telling you to do spells on other people, on your family, on your friends. And sometimes they're included, sometimes they're not, and that's just one that gives me the instant ick of like, they should be way more, like start young on what is consent, why does that matter? This is a really good place to start. And we just skim right over that one. Don't like that. That's my own personal one that I always focus on. Most other book like reviewers don't. It's just my own personal issue. The thing that a lot of people brought up is there's a lot of stuff in this book that isn't really kid appropriate. And I think it depends a lot on the maturity of your kids, but also just in general. I don't know that I would trust like my 14-year-old niece right now, let alone her 11-year-old sister, with essential oils and candles unattended. I just wouldn't do that. Like, I think some kids could handle that maturity-wise, but like a lot of them not so much. And this book is telling them to use essential oils on a very regular basis, to use candles on a very regular basis. And there's just a lot of that I'm like, I don't know. I don't know about that. Like, again, maturity level really would matter. There's also some information in here that's like iffy at best, and I don't personally think I would be including this into my kids' repertoire of books because no. So, of course, I've mentioned this a few times with books recently, but she tells you to just soak crystals in salt water. Just do that overnight. No warnings at all mentioned at all. So your poor kid, again, I go to the same example every time, but I remember it being my first example I was introduced to. It wasn't actually me who had the problem, but it was a YouTuber back in the day when we actually had a community here. He had got a really pretty piece of selenite and he was so stoked, and he was gonna soak it in moon water under the full moon in their like little outdoor ritual space, and then he left it there, and then in the morning it was just gone, and then Googled it and was like, damn it. So that's one of those things that it's like, it's the example I always go to, but this book doesn't tell you anything about that. And so it's like, okay, if your parents aren't going to be witches and this is the only resource you have, this is not helpful. You're going to mess up with that, inevitably. Not every crystal. There is a lot that would be perfectly fine. Would I personally do it? No, I don't really soak my crystals in water. And like, if I'm gonna put any in water, they're gonna be my found stones that are just like the random rocks I find out and about, because they've handled it all. Like, they're good. They're golden. They are perfectly fine to see rain, snow, sun, don't matter. They're fine. The gems that are very fancy, very expensive, very like carefully curated, those ones I'm way more careful with, and it's just like, let's just use some incense or just visualize. Maybe moonlight. That's pushing it. And so, yeah, telling you to soak your crystals in salt water overnight. Don't think it's gonna happen very well for all of the crystals. It also has a lot of stuff that, like, it does pull into cultural appropriation and just in general. I would be a little nervous about, like, how this information is being presented. And it even gave me a little bit of the ick, to be perfectly honest. So the first one, very common. We've talked about this a lot. But for a book that's from 2020, I kind of thought it was like, why are you still doing this? I could see older books, but like, it's like, when are we getting with the times? And it was to use a smudge stick, which again, we don't usually call it that anymore. It's like an herbal bundle. And so we've just changed the word. Kind of does the same thing, but it is not actually the ritual that is tied to the specific cultures. I don't know if every tribe uses it, but I feel like there was a few that used specifically a smudging ritual. But anywho, no mention for that. And the other one that was like, why? Well, why? Is gris. And I think that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. If I remember correctly, it's from the hoodoo traditions, but I could be wrong. But it doesn't give you any context about it, and all you're doing is making like a spell pouch. That's it. And it feels weird to have no cultural context at all. And the history is also very, very, very glossed over, and none of the other reviewers had pointed this out, so maybe they don't care. I personally care. So the last point is that this book is very heavily based that witches are women. And like, again, I know my audience. I know I have quite a few of you who are dudes who watch my content. So you're obviously gonna be like, well, this is some bullshit. But also, like, for me, when I'm raising my kids, I want them to know that there are male witches. They will know that anyways, because their father will be, but like, it's just so disheartening to see history represented that only women were witches, which is also just not the greatest example of giving history, I feel like. Granted, I grew up watching documentaries forever, since I can remember, and so the idea of not knowing actual history and not knowing the harsh realities of things kind of irks me, because it's very glossed over, and also just kind of wrong. Like, I realized Triumph of the Moon, way above a kid's perspective. Like, that's a dense book for adults, let alone a kid. But at the same time, like, we should not be saying that witches eventually, like, witchcraft eventually became paganism. No, first of all, pagan came first. And also, witchcraft kind of doesn't have to be tied to a religion. It's kind of its own thing, kinda. But if you're looking historically, it's the same thing. Like, it's just certain practices and stuff that started as pagan beliefs, lowercase pagan, and then, you know, it's changed over the years. But throughout all of time, it has not just been one gender. And their section on the Norse, and also just the Vikings, was just... I have never come across the word that she used for their, like, sorcerer advisor. And I'm like, I don't think that was a thing, to be perfectly honest. They had the cat always eats every single time I sit down to record. Anyways, but they had the vulvas, which are the, like, seers and kind of the prophets and stuff of the Norse world. Because again, Viking was a job, not the people, but okay. And also, like, they never had sorcerer. Like, most magic was, like, they had satyr, but that was a feminine magic, and it was heavily disregarded for men. Like, if you did it, there's a lot of slurs you could use to, like, refer to that nowadays. But, like, it's not, they didn't have sorcerers. That wasn't a thing in the Viking world, especially if they're considering it specifically the Viking age, not just all of the Norse, you know. But like, it's stuff like that I'm just like, why? It's the stupid details, but like, why? And again, the fact that the history is so glossed over, and of course it's only women, and again, heavily heavily glossed, and you're like, at some point you're doing a disservice. It's like when we grew up and we learned about Christopher Columbus discovering America, and then as an adult you're like, okay, so actually no, on like every single front there were other people who had already migrated here like hundreds or thousands of years before, and then you also had, oh my god, the Vikings, who came here too, to at least this continent, you know? They had come over, I think it was somewhere in Canada, modern day Canada, they had, that was before Christopher Columbus. And also he was just a horrible person, and we didn't learn that. We learned that he was like this good guy, blah blah blah. And like the first Thanksgiving, it's like the same thing of like learning that it's like, oh, it was this cute little story, and then you learn the real like story as an adult and you're like, this is horrific, why did we learn this? There's so many other like historical things that you could learn about that's like, yeah, humans coming together, woo. And then there's also like horrible humans that it's like, maybe we learn about that when we're teenagers, not little, and lie to them. And this book is like perpetuating lies about like witchcraft history. It's just like, no. Just no. And I hated that every time. It was always like, but the women who came before you and the women witches, and you're like, okay, even if we go with that, that's still wrong because there were men accused, not a lot, and to be perfectly honest, I'm pretty confident they were not the most straight of dudes. And also just were outcasted in general. They were usually accused just like women. But also, this book is aimed at kids, right? So if you think about it, there's a decent chunk of very actually really claim the title of witch ancestors who were men. Scott Cunningham, Raymond Buckland, Gerald Gardner, I think Alexander Sanders, I think he also is passed by now. And let alone if you go more occult in general, you've got, you know, like Aleister Crowley. Like there's so many male figures, let alone the female. You have Dion Fortune, you've got, oh, what's her name? Well, Starhawk's still alive, but there's the other one that I always get Dion Fortune and then the other one mixed up. Dorian Valiente. There's women, there's men, there's both. And I'm pretty confident soon enough we will have some non-binary names that are up there in the ranks with all of the others. And so it's like, why are we not just including them? Because like, to be perfectly honest, if you're gonna talk about the witches, why are we not including modern day? And this was very Wicca based too, by the way, because it also talked about how like the threefold law obviously applies to everything, and that's why you practice white magic, which I'm not a fan of anyways. The racial undertone is a little too real, especially in the modern world. Like just here in the US and specifically even here in Utah, we've had like the words I can't say on YouTube, groups that are from World War II that you're like, I thought these a-holes had died off, and they're still here. They're just, the city has done nothing about it, and they're just there, and you're like, okay, oh, this is fun. Like just, we're a little part of you is like, can you just adopt us, Canada, please? Just adopt us. If we voted blue, can we leave, please? Because it sucks here. And yeah, just adopt us. We could present our voter cards to be like, please, because it's just so bad. But the point is that in this era of life, you know, maybe we don't use still racially heavy words. And white magic, black magic, the undertone, of course, is white magic's gonna be good because white people have been considered the good ones, and darker and black are considered bad. Is it stupid? Yes, but it's still there, and it just feels really weird to have that. So anyways, I just didn't like this book. So if you are a parent, I would be a little cautious about this. Read through it first, figure out your own kids', like, you know, maturity, see if it's something they could handle, and maybe go forth with it, but just be forewarned on the stuff I've mentioned. There might be other things that stand out to you. These are just what stood out to me. But I would love to know your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons. If you would like to support me and get access to exclusive content, I've got other book reviews, I have my audiobooks, I have Witching Weekly, and I have vlogs and just random chit chats. All sorts of stuff going up all the time over on Patreon. And thank you if you have bought my books. They're always linked down below. Last month I had 5 book sales, which, not gonna lie, it's kind of awesome to see that bigger than 3 or 1, because that's usually my numbers. So thank you to the 5 orders that I had last month. That was not expected. So thank you to those of you who bought my books. And of course, if you've made it to the very end of my video, honestly, it is the thing that helps the absolute most, and it takes the least amount of effort for you. Just let me play in the background for a while. It does just as good as everything else, really, if not more. So anyways, till next time, thank you for coming all the way to the very end of this video, and blessed be.